What I realized when I started to manage people, when you're a first manager, there's a lot of things that you don't know, and there's a lot of errors that you do. I think naturally it came to me to just be very transparent about what I was thinking, because I had people in my team that I think knew more than me. And I just realized that being approachable to my team, like making sure that I was sharing to them what I was thinking, how did I feel. I just realized we had very positive interaction, very good mood in the team, very dynamic ways of working. And I was realizing that maybe other managers in some of the companies I work maybe were not having this kind of, I would say, more healthy relationship with their direct reports, that maybe it was more bossy, all right? Because when you're a manager sometimes, which is normal, like you want to be a bit more in control, especially if it's the first time, so you are very directive.
Welcome to the Product Weekend podcast. I'm your host, João Moita, and today we're diving into psychological safety in product teams. This is the second episode of our third season, and we have an incredible guest with us, Florian Bonnet. Florian brings a wealth of experience from his journey in theoretical physics to leading successful product teams. In this episode, Florian shares his personal story, including his challenges with burnout, and how he has learned to create environments where teams can innovate without fear. We discuss the importance of transparency, empathy, and setting clear expectations, all crucial elements to building a psychologically safe team. Whether you're a leader or an individual contributor, you'll find valuable insights in our conversation. Before we jump in, don't forget to follow our podcast wherever you listen and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us grow and keep bringing you valuable content. Thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. Florian, welcome to the Product Weekend podcast. It's great
Thanks
to
for
have
having
you.
me. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Let's start with a question that we usually ask our guests, a bit more personal. What's a recent weekend that you really enjoyed?
I was in Crete not so long ago, so I guess that was a good weekend. I think for me, like maybe a definition of a good weekend is a mix of chill time, recharge the battery, but I also like to learn, always do something. Lately, I'm into a lot of drawing. Like perfect weekend would be a bit of chillax time, not doing anything, wandering a bit on YouTube or stuff like that. Then a bit of drawing, spending time with my wife, like maybe going in a cafe together, spend time drawing there. And then for sure, I'll try to spend time with friends as much as I can.
Awesome. So combination of relaxation, but also some creative time and being with people. Always
Feeling
great.
of being a little bit productive, I would put it this way.
Yeah. Does it annoy you when you're not feeling productive or you feel like you're not doing anything?
I have some weekends where I really like to do nothing, but it's on purpose. There is the Olympics now, right? So, for example, this weekend was a lot of watching sport events, but then it's really purposeful. But yeah, I hate when I'm arriving on like Sunday evening and I felt like I did nothing out of my weekends. I felt, there are 52 weekends a year, so one less where I could have done more things. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right, then let's get into the topic. So today we'll talk a bit about psychological safety, but we'll get specific about your journey, your challenges, and some of the learnings that you had on the way, and some advice for people listening. We'll probably have people listening from different backgrounds, mostly in product, I assume, some in more leadership positions, some in more individual contributor ones, but I guess there's learnings and things that everyone can take into account. So let's start with the introduction. Could you give us a brief overview of your background and also how your understanding of psychological safety evolved over the years and with specific landmarks?
Yeah. So my background, I work in product now, but actually I started my career doing research in theoretical physics, which was my passion since a very young age, which I think, and we can talk about it later, I think shaped also how I think about psychological safety in some ways. So I did a PhD, I did 3 years of postdocs, and then I moved into the business world. So I transitioned my career in the business through strategy consulting in Paris. We will talk about an example there about non-psychological safety as well. And yeah, after 2 years of consulting, decided to leave and found out that startup will be a good environment for me to express my skill and to grow. So I started my journey in 2015 in a startup, now actually quite a big company called Jumia in Paris. After a year, I moved to Berlin to work for, and basically it's been like now 8 years I'm in Berlin, where I grew my career in being an individual contributor and then becoming a manager, right? First in the CRM, then in product. And I think like I always had the feeling of what are the best conditions for my team to be creative. I think it comes from my research time. So I think psychological safety was not a topic I was really aware of, but came through some questions that I had about making sure people could express themselves and bring creativity to the table to try to find innovative solutions to problems. And at the end of 2019, I actually got lucky to be able to do an executive master degree at the London School of Economics over a period of 2 years. And during that master, I really delved into the topic of psychological safety really well through different courses, especially on organizational behavior and how do you build like teams that are more resilient in some ways. And psychological safety is a very important factor of that. And since then, I just try to be a bit more proactive into thinking about how to build the best conditions for my team to feel safe to express their opinion, to contribute to decision making, to bring novelty to the table without the fear of being like shut down, like out of the blue, right? And really try to encourage people to, feel confident about who they are, like their skills and what they can bring to the table, right? And not only for me and my teams, but at the organizational level, right? And the entire company. And it's not easy. We all have the pressure of business goals, like achieving our results. And I think all of us are a bit egoistic in some ways, like we have strong opinions. So how do you make space for yourself and for the other ones in the chaos of a startup world is quite interesting. So that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. That's great. There's a lot of things to unpack there. Maybe let's start with your academic background and the thing you mentioned that it shaped a bit the way you think about psychological safety. In what way did it influence your understanding of the topic?
Yeah, so it was my passion since I was, 12. So for me, I think I worked in research until I was 29, I think. So until that age, I really worked in something that was my passion. So work and like personal life was really just like a blurry thing, all mixed up because I was really doing what I always wanted to do. And it was really a true passion. And so I was like, when I work in business, I always wanted to recreate that, right? I want people to be happy to go to work. I want people to be excited about what they're going to do. And you need a certain set of conditions to do that, right? And I see many people that are not really excited about their work because they don't really understand how they can contribute, what they can bring to the table. So that's something that really shaped the way I think I lead teams and I behave at work. And I think also when you do research, you always tackle novelty, you create knowledge, right? You tackle problems that have never been tackled by anybody else before. So you have to be creative. You have to bring a lot of ideas to the table. Be happy to be challenged by others because there's going to be a lot of dead roads along the way and you have to close these areas. And I think that's a way of working that is very exciting. You can spend like days, if not months, on topics, on problems, basically exchange ideas. It's very like dynamic, find dead ends. And then one day you actually find like a solution that actually works and you just create something that is amazing and that is meant to last forever in the big knowledge pool of humanity. And I feel like this way of working, of really being on the whiteboard, exchanging ideas, and like somehow finding that the solution is going to come from somewhere that you don't expect it, is actually really thrilling. And in the business world, this can only happen if you can work with others and allow everybody to express themselves, right? And to bring opinions, because through diversity, you will get this innovation that you need to actually achieve your business goals. Right. So I think that's why I think my background in research is shaping the way I think about psychological safety, because I got to experience something that is, I will not say unique, but quite different than the business world for, let's say, first 8 to 10 years of my professional life.
Yeah. So that sharing of ideas, open communication, like tackling problems and being honest, having that scientific mindset of, okay,
you cannot bullshit your way around something. When you write a scientific article, there is peer reviewing. People will see if you just try to hack something and it's not true. So you have to be honest, and you know that there is 99.999% of chance that your idea is not going to be right and you're going to be wrong. So you are very open about this.
Interesting. Yeah, that goes pretty much in line with how we are also thinking about psychological safety. Of one of the main things we advocate for is to have this scientist mindset of don't jump into conclusions, frame like insights as assumptions and not as hard facts. I think that's a very important thing.
I think also be open to be to be convinced. Like it's a bit of a link to like debating, which is I think is a big topic nowadays, especially in politics and everything. But I remember when at university we had an English class and we had to simulate some debates at some point, and the teacher said, the key of debate is to enter the field with the willingness to be convinced by the other people. And I think with like innovation ideas and related to psychological safety, you need to leave the space for ideas to be, you need to pull the thread and see where they lead before shutting them down, because sometimes you don't have all the clues and all the cues, and you don't understand if something is going to be right or wrong from the onset. You need to explore it, and you need to leave the space for the exploration.
Exactly. Yeah, that makes sense. And also, like, in terms of the decisions, being aware that they may be wrong, like being knowing that you can't know for sure that it will work out. It's a bet that you're making based on the information that you have.
Exactly.
That relates a lot to the academic research mindset that you need to have.
Yeah.
Cool. And then why did you decide to move into business? What was
it's a combination of many things. I'm going to touch a bit of personal things, but actually one side of psychological safety is also to be vulnerable, right? And willing to share things. So as I said, it was my passion since I was very young, and I chose the field of theoretical physics. So you really touched trying to understand the fabric of nature. So you have to solve very deep problems that take a lot of time. But the issue of theoretical physics is to work, you need a paper and a pen most of the time, sometimes a laptop, especially nowadays. But you produce a lot of people that do PhDs, but there are very, very few positions in Europe, right? So, I mean, I worked in Europe during my time, and I was looking to get a position anywhere in Europe. And the issue is that it's really hard to find a position, and I see a lot of people reaching their 40s and still doing postdoctorate assignments. So you have contracts of 1 to 5 years, and then you have to move to another country. And I didn't want that for myself. And I said, okay, if this does not work, what do I do for myself? At the same time, I was also a bit pissed off by the field, because a lot of people were tackling, I would say, the sexy topics. And
that got funding and so on.
Got funding because you need to get funding, you need to publish and get citations. And so if you write on a sexy topic, then you get that. But most of these topics were not the ones that actually would really answer the deep questions that the community had. But I understand why people would do it, but I didn't sign for that. I really signed to actually literally hurt my neurons on really tough problems. And so, yeah, that was the second thing that really started to piss me off a bit, to be a bit disillusioned by the field, which was hard because it was my passion. And then the third one is actually quite personal. Is I have a twin brother, and back in 2010, he got cancer on one of his legs. He's perfectly fine today, but I think it really accelerated the thinking of, is this my life? Do I need to do anything? Should I do something else? So I started to look, if this research doesn't pan out, what do I do? Really hard, because you have a set of skills that is really hard to translate to other things, or at least I thought at the time. And literally I was in Italy at the time working. I started open Google on, I think it was like a Thursday afternoon, and started to type theoretical physics plus business. And then I just started from there, try to look at people that change career from research, and progressively I stumbled on the world of strategy consulting. That felt very attractive because very generalist, so I could see a lot of things. And at the same time, from an intellectual point of view, so that I would not get bored, right? So it felt like the right environment. And then from there, I got lucky to get into contact with Boston Consulting Group in Paris. And yeah, the rest is history.
Okay, that's interesting. And how did that go? How was that translation? Did you manage to actually translate the skills that you had into being a good consultant, the drive that you had?
Yes and no. And we're going to talk about actually a bad experience. So I worked for 2 years, and I did a burnout after roughly almost a year and a half. I continued after my burnout, but for me, it was really hard. I was going from a field where I knew nothing about business. Like, I never used Excel before joining a BCG Paris office. I didn't know anything about how a company works. The word marketing was, ads on TV, but what really does it mean? What do you do? And it was really hard. My first mission was on working for a big car manufacturer at the world level and helping them to increase their operational margin. Yeah, I have zero knowledge about after sales parts of cars and everything, and I was put on this project. So I was always feeling that I was rushing after the car and trying to learn as fast as I could, which I like. And that was really thrilling to learn a lot. But at the same time, I felt like everything I was doing was wrong, right? I was very few guidance from the people I was working with, because you have to be very fast, and there's not always the time for people to teach you, unfortunately. So I was always overworking because I had to redo a lot of the things because it was never good enough. So the feedback loop was always, when it was good, but you need to do the rest. And when it was bad, of course, okay, what did you do? You need to do this and on top the rest. So I started to enter a very negative loop of basically the feedback was always negative and bad. I was struggling to get on track with the work. So I was really like, I was not like super bad, but really I was struggling to get like barely on par with the level of expectations. And at the same time, I had a huge frustration because I was trying to bring ideas to the table from my past and the ways I would see things. And yeah, I was a bit like brushed away. You don't have any expertise. Go away. One example was a work that we did on trying to evaluate how do you evaluate like the top 200 people in a company when they are like merger and acquisitions, right? For example, without talking to them. And I remember looking at Ligny, developing a little algorithm to try to find the career progression of people and having a partner looking at me and say, it's too complex to explain to the clients. And 5 minutes after asking something that was completely realistic and to do it in a week, right? So it's just like really, I was lost in an environment that I did not understand. And basically one day I got on a mission with a project leader and it went really, really bad. I had to do some benchmarking exercise. And the way that I work is I like just plan my work. And then I was like, if we agree on the approach, I would just go and get actually the job done. And so first evening, I present my approach to the project leader and she just really yelled at me because she wanted to see already, I don't know, 20, 50 slides with all the materials and everything. And I was just, I'm not going to waste time doing all this research if we don't agree on what we want to show. So it went really bad. And I remember the next day going to work with quite a lot of fear, actually, of, wow, what's going to happen to me. And like it was the last drop on a bucket that was already quite full with zero handling of expectations for what my day would be. I never knew when I was going to go to bed, going home. I never knew what was going to be expected of me during the day. I was struggling to understand what good was looking like for me, what was my production criteria of success. And yeah, like after like very few days on that mission, one morning, I just went to my doctor and I said, I'm just really tired. And I'm very resilient. When I was doing research, I was sleeping like 4 or 5 hours a day just because I was really enjoying what I was doing. And in here, I was sleeping like more or less the same time, but I was really exhausted. And yeah, he told me like, after 5 minutes of talking, you're doing a burnout. And I was like actually shocked. I didn't think about this word ever. And yeah, it started some thinking with the BCG office that was very supportive of me during that period to try to understand what happened. And I think everything was triggered by, again, day in, day out, not knowing what was going to happen to me because I was not at all in control of what I was doing at any point in time, right? And very negative feedback loop. On top of that, I came to look for something that I didn't find in terms of intellectual challenge. Every time I thought I could be bringing something to the table, I was shut down, right? And all the ingredients against psychological safety down the line. And I'm reading a book now on like how to make team more resilient. And of course, there is a chapter about psychological safety. And when I read the book, I just realized that I became unresilient because actually I didn't have psychological safety in my current job in my at the time job in consulting. So it was tough. I learned from it. I continued to work a bit into it. And then I just decided it was just not for me, not the right environment for me to thrive, which is okay. I think psychological safety is not to make everybody like perform super well in an environment, right? Some people need different things. So you need to set the environment that you want. You just need to make sure that if somebody should perform in that environment, then they should, right? And for me, at the time, it was just not the right moment, right? The step was too hard. If I would come back today, I would be a much different consultant for sure.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for sharing and for being so open about it. So if I understood and if I didn't miss anything, there was a combination of factors, and I would highlight not getting positive reinforcement from your work, being dismissed, so lack of agency, not being able to pursue your own ideas, feeling of imposter syndrome and not feeling that you're living up to the task, and the lack of predictability of always being unsure what would come, right?
It was really hard. Like every morning I was really like, I missed 2 of my birthdays because I was just like, I planned stuff and actually now, sorry, like we need to work until like 2 a.m. Like it's really, really hard as an environment. It doesn't have to be this way. But I think I was not given the tools at the time to also say no, because I think I always have imposter syndrome, still now, today when any assignment. But at the time, it was huge, right? So I really needed a bit of more of somebody in my corner to help me to just get that little nudge to get me to a state where I would be actually a bit better in my performance. But I never got it, unfortunately.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for sharing. And also, I relate a bit to the story and to the feelings. I also worked in consulting, but only for a short period of time. And I think I was lucky that the moment that it was getting a bit tough and I was realizing that it was not for me, I was feeling also that I was not matching the expectations. It also matched with a good timing with Product Week and picking up, and that allowed me to make the move and to make the jump. But yeah, actually, like in that company, Product People, I think I can talk about that. I always felt very supported and very open environment to talk about these things. But still the pressure was very high. So there was openness and there was the place to have these discussions. People were not screaming and bashing each other. But still there are some elements of psychological safety eventually that may be missing when there's too much pressure, not enough reinforcement.
Very high perform, I would say, very high standard environment, right? I think you really need to have all the tools and frameworks and processes to allow people to perform high. And some people are not able to perform at that level, which is perfectly fine, right? You need everything to make a world. But if you really don't have the tools, then it's going to be really hard for you. You need to recruit very exceptional people, and very few people are able to meet that standard without the set of tools that you can provide to them to grow into it, right? Yeah, that's unfortunately an issue of a lot of managers, especially young managers. I think in startups, many people are like becoming first manager. Their managers were first manager not so long ago. So very few people actually take the time to learn the tools to actually set up these environments.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it reminds me of something that in some conversations has popped up as a key factor in psychological safety, or a process that can help, which is like setting very clear expectations and being very clear and intentional about what you will be doing, what's the expectation, to reduce that lack of predictability and people being unsure. And I think when I started in this company, I had an expectation on the amount of time that I would need to be working. And that was not clarified beforehand. It only kept popping up. And then it was a bit like, am I the one that I am unable to meet the goals in the 8 hours of the day, or am I really supposed to be working over hours? And it was not a clear clarification on that. And on your experiences now as a manager, how can you ensure that? How can you put in place a process or tools or whatever it is?
I think there are two things. There's always two dimensions. There is what you should do in terms of business outcome, and what you should do as a professional, and what is expected from you, I would say, as in terms of craft. So I think the first one, in terms of, I would say, business outcome, like we talk about strategy, road mapping, OKRs, all these things, I think are very important. You cannot expect people to be confident or bring innovation to the table if they don't know where they're supposed to go, right? I think it's very important for any company to take the time to really clarify. It's going to sound like very basic what I'm saying, or repeating some books, but it's true. You need to understand what's the vision, what we really want to achieve in the long term, and then take the time as leadership to break it down in terms of milestones and strategic axis that you need to explore to go there. If I take the example of SpaceX that want to ship rockets and reusable rockets, technically their vision, probably Elon Musk, is probably actually allow anybody to go to space, right? So the first step is to actually build rockets that can re-enter and produce them for cheap, right? So then what are these axes? You need to, find the right components that can not burn on re-entry. If people need to go to space, they probably need to derive driving codes for a space, all these things, right? And at some point, as a leader, you stop, and then you say, no, I need to enable my team to take that and transform it into milestones that are closer to us, right? And derive the path of success for every of the teams, right? And this is very important work, because if you do that cascading top-down up to the end, where it seems like the top says like up to the little task of tomorrow, I tell you what to do, nobody has agency. They just come and they just execute. And then the moment they try to do something that they think is going to be better, they're going to be slapped on the face and saying, I didn't tell you to do that. And if you didn't explain the cascading from the top, people might start to innovate on an area that doesn't make sense with the long-term vision, but because they didn't have it, and then they got slapped on the face saying like, why did you do that? It actually doesn't relate to what we want to achieve. So you need to give that like structure to people, like this framework, for them to understand where they are located within the bigger picture of the company, what's their playground, and what are the boundaries of the playground, saying like, you cannot go here, you cannot go there, but in the between, everything is up to you. Like you can do literally everything, right? So that's the first step, is having this cascading. And a good road mapping exercise on a yearly basis is really first top down, where you give like directions or what you want to achieve in the next year, just realigning with the big strategy view. Then you give it to the teams. You accompany them, but they should produce a bottom-up approach of like, from these objectives, that's what we can do. That's what we think we cannot do, but we can do something else, something you didn't think about, but we think would contribute. And then you have a last like step where actually as a leader or like the leadership and members entirely will come and make the trade-offs, right? We don't have enough resources to do everything. We want to adjust a bit on the margin, right? That back and forth and exchange of ideas is what make people adhere to a strategy, to a roadmap, and allow the exchange of decision-making principles, right? Because what you want is when you build a roadmap, you make some decision based on some key principles, whether it is cost, whether it is this part of the customer experience first versus the other ones. No matter what, you want people to understand your decision-making process. So that during the year when they need to make trade-offs, you don't need to be involved. You know they're going to make, in 90% of the cases, the right decisions. And in some instances, they might not make the right decision, but that's okay, right? Because maybe you didn't tell them everything they need to know, or it was a case you didn't anticipate it. I think that's the first thing. So whether it is OKR or any other system, try to provide these guidelines at every level of the company of what is expected from people to do in the next period of time, whether it is like a month, trimester, a year, at the individual level, at the team level, at the unit level, and how everything builds up. The second thing is what is expected for you as a professional. If you're a PM, a senior PM, if you're a designer, what are the skills that you need to exhibit for you to be considered as good in your job and also to get promoted to the next level? Many times when I just joined the company like a few months ago, and actually I just finished the design of the career ladder for product and design, right? If you don't have that, how do you evaluate people? How do you tell them they are performing well or not? You might tell them during the whole year they are doing well, and at the end of the year you say, no, sorry, you will not get promoted, you will not get a raise because, oh yeah, actually I have new criteria to come. When we talk about predictability, you want people to know what they need to do to elevate themselves within the career ladder and within the company. Otherwise, they're going to be pissed off for sure. But also they will at some point just stop to contribute because they don't understand why are some people promoted versus me. I feel like I work a lot and I don't get rewarded. So you need to be clear about the criteria of success for themselves in terms of craft on top of the criteria of success for the business that we just talked about before. And if you give that framework, then you empowered people to actually behave the way you want, right? You set up expectations. If people are not happy with that, we can have a discussion, but at least everything is on the table. There is nothing hidden, no hidden agenda or anything. And you allow people to grow within that framework. And as a manager, you just need to make sure that you accompany them in that growth, meaning if you expect, for example, I don't know, a senior PM to be good in defining the commercialization plan of their new feature, you need to have a setup where they can develop that in the next 6 months. Otherwise, what's the point, right? So that's where the role of a leader is actually not only setting up the framework, but now becoming a coach, training the team, supporting them into their growth. And that's something also that many young managers don't know how to do very well because nobody told them they should do that. So that's more or less like the two things that I see you need to really set up. We can, of course, deep dive into the details.
Oh, awesome. Thanks. That's a great intro. And there's a lot of things I want to dive deeper into. But so just to recap a bit on the strategy planning and the role of the leader, it's basically setting the vision on the leadership level. So what's the direction that we're going? And then go until trickle down into more specific things until a certain point. And that's probably one of the main roles of a leader is understanding how far, how specific you want to go, right?
Yeah.
So
I think it depends on the maturity of your team. Yeah, like maturity of your team, how many leaders you have in your team. If you're like, I don't know, I'm a VP product, but I have only 3 PMs below me with different seniority. If you have, I don't know, 3 directors and 5 group PMs below you, you will not stop at the same level as if you have only like PMs and senior PMs. So you need to understand what can people achieve and up until when you need to actually make the work for them so that then they actually feel that they can actually achieve something with what you are going to give to them. If you just ask somebody that has 3 years of experience in product management, hey, derive the next 24-month roadmap for this product, good luck. Like they are not equipped to do that. They never did that exercise. They don't understand how to approach this. You need to be realistic with people.
So it's very dependent on the context of the product, but also on the people that you have, and you need to go maybe deeper or more high level depending on the level of the skills or experience of the people. If you go too specific with someone that has more skills, probably they will feel like the lack of agency that we were mentioning before. On the other hand, if we give too much freedom to someone that's junior, we may get into the imposter syndrome of not knowing what to do, feeling lost, and so it's a tricky balance.
Exactly.
Interesting. And also the other thing that you mentioned is that then the back and forth between leadership and the strategy and the teams, right? That's totally, you'd say, an essential part of the process.
It's essential. Like when you talk about psychological safety, is about encouraging ideas, right? And so making sure that you like set the ground for people to bring their ideas, have a setup where you can exchange about these ideas. And through that, especially when we talk about road mapping, me as a leader, what I tried is really to walk people through my way of thinking. So sometimes you have to shut ideas down, right? But I always try to tell them like, this is why, that's how I think. Then we can disagree or agree, but this is how I think. And then sometimes you just tell them, that's how I think. That's the context that I have. They bring you some elements that you didn't know about, and then you evolve and maybe you go with their ideas, maybe yours, maybe a third one that actually appears to be the better idea. But you need this moment of exchange so that everybody understands the global context, because we all hear different things when we do these exercises. We all have different level of understanding and depth of understanding in different areas of the business and of the product. And so if you think that you can make the decision by yourself, then why do the exercise in the first place? So you need to actually make sure that through the discussion, you empower people to make better decisions because everybody aligns on the common ground of context and understanding of the situation.
And also going back to that scientist mindset, being open to being wrong, right? Okay,
totally.
I have this strategy, this is the priority, but if the team tells me that's not feasible because of this and that, maybe we should prioritize this other thing instead. You should be open to reframe and reshape the strategy.
And it's hard because you need to find the right balance. We are all very attached to our ideas. When you think you have a smart idea, you want to see it realized, and somebody tells you, no, it's not going to be the case. It's tough. It's tough, right? And there are other times when you hear some things and either it's not going to work, you are deeply convinced about it, or you know that people tell you we cannot do it, but actually you can do it, right? Or you're convinced that you can actually force your way into it. You have to find the right balance with sometimes imposing stuff to just, it's the same as failure the other way, right? You need to accept to be convinced that you are wrong, but sometimes you need also to make sure that the other people try something new themselves and just accept to try. And if they fail, you just need to make sure that I'm on your side, right? I would say impose this on you, meaning it went my way this time, but I'm here to support you, right? The same way that if it is your idea that actually we choose, I'm here as well to support you if it fails, right? And I will make sure to give you the credit if you are successful. It goes both ways. So you need to create these conditions of experimentation also in the way you make decisions, because decision making is science and also art, right? And so for sure you fail. You just need to have the process where you can revisit your decision, what went wrong, and just make sure that there is no culprit and finger pointing. Just make sure that we design better processes the next time and we evolve with all the decisions which are in themselves an experimentation, right?
Exactly. Love that. Yeah, that's very, the way we're phrasing it, framing decisions as bets, that you have a certain expected outcome that you want to get. There's a cost to placing the bet, and then also a percentage or a likelihood of the bet turning out to be successful. And then you have like, my bet is this one, your bet is this one. Now let's agree on which bet we're going to place, right? And having it's originally my bet, but we're making the bet together. That's a way to...
I like the idea of bet, something that we use a lot in products for sure, like in my teams as well. And you see when people I used to work in a lot of growth teams, right? Actually, most of my career in product is around growth topics. And you have to make big bets in growth, right? You want to generate more business. And yes, with like small optimization of change the color of the button, change the copy, you can do a lot. But sometimes you need to experiment. Like my time at Typeform, we experimented on a reverse trial. we knew when we worked on the experiment, I told my team, there's a high chance we're going to lose conversion rate. You should not freak out because we had a clear budget with this amount of improvement on conversion rate every month. And I told them, it's going to take time. We probably will not be successful at the beginning. That's okay, right? We are in it together. Our job is to learn fast, right? So as long as we learn, if we destroy a bit of conversion rate along the way, that's okay. As long as we know where we progress and how to be successful, it's going to be okay, right? So you need to give that with psychological safety, especially with experimentation, you need to give the mandate to people that they can go and like literally seek crazy ideas, test them. You just need to give them the conditions. If you are in a tough position with your company where maybe you start to lose money, right, or growth is really stalling, then maybe the appetite for this is less at the leadership level. So you just tell them that's the frequency at which you can do this, or this is the amount of resources you can spend on doing that, right? And try to like give them again a new boundaries within which they can play, and you will support them as much as you can. But make sure that you don't just tell people like, I need plus 50% next year of growth. And the moment people do one experiment and they fail, to just yell at them, because then they will go back to just change very little thing and you will never grow this way. So I really like this mention of bets and really trying to understand with people what are the constraints that we put ourselves to evaluate these bets and make sure that when we take a bet, we understand properly the risk and we manage this risk, right?
Talking about managing risks and taking bets, we're betting that if you've made it this far in the episode, you're finding our discussion valuable. If that's the case, why not follow the podcast and leave us a quick rating? It helps us understand what's working and allows more people to discover the show. Thanks for your support. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
That's great. It's also creating this safe to fail environment that people are not threatened or afraid that they will suffer personally from it. Cool.
I think there is a mistake by a lot of people in the leadership positions that they feel like, oh, if you know your job, you should be right from day one, right? Or you just need to talk to your customers and then that's it. The first thing that you will develop is right. It doesn't happen this way, especially in product. It takes time to find the right path to success, right? So you need to experiment. You need to try along the way. And I showed that like at Typeform, I showed my team a diagram and I showed, hey, that's the rhythm of experiment we have. And literally we were learning 2.5 times a quarter. And I said, now if you take 1 week to develop something, 1 week to collect the data, the day after the data is collected, you have the result, you can learn 9 to 10 times a quarter, right? Literally, you do 4 times like more learning in a year. If you do 4 times more learning in a year, at the end of the year, you probably have found one area where actually you can improve the business. So you have to also educate leadership about this, right? There's a lot of things that nobody did before. It's very hard to understand customers, to understand how their pain points relate to your product and how the product can solve their pain points. And because there's so many ways to do that, and you need to educate them about, we are in the business of learning, right? I, of course, engage myself in some business results, but you cannot expect that it's going to be linear. You cannot expect that I will do everything on the first day of the month or the year, and then after that it's going to be flat. No, it's probably going to be very flat, and then at some point it's going to be very high because we started to learn. And you need to accompany the leaders into that so that they give you the room to explore. And if they don't, you need to be very clear with your team and saying that, guys, we don't have the room to really do a lot of exploration in that period because X and Y, so that people like, yes, they can be frustrated, but again, you need to be transparent with them so they understand where the decisions are coming from and where they can play, where they are not authorized to play for their own good, right? And for the good of the company, and try to find the right balance. And as a leader, you also need to sometimes shield them a bit and like you tell them a bit, you don't tell them everything, or you allow them to go beyond the boundary from time to time, right? But in a reasonable measure to, again, still not lose this feeling of we can express ourselves, right? We can contribute meaningfully to what's happening and not everything is dictated by the top.
Exactly. Creating like an environment where you can experiment small and learn as fast as possible. Make these learning cycles as short as possible. And another aspect of it, and I want to go back to the trade-offs and to the decision making, but just a small thing here on this creating a safe to fail environment. Another aspect I find relevant is making people feel that it's okay if it's not for you, right? So going back to your example and the stories we were talking at the beginning, that you were feeling like you're not worth it, you don't have the capacity to do it, you're not up to the job, and so on. And make this explicit with the people that you're working with, that if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. We're not family, we're a team working together. And if it doesn't work, you can try another team and so on. How do you see that aspect, and how do you manage that with team members? Because it's also a balance, right? Because you also want people to be committed and to be engaged, but at the same time, not feel that their self-worth is
it's totally. So when I decided to quit consulting, for example, the person in charge of a career in the BCG told me like, hey, you should not be ashamed. Actually, you reached the 2-year milestone that everybody reached when they leave. And it's okay, it's not for you. And we're going to find together actually what's for you. And I think, as I said, like you have within a company, you have different style of managers, of teams. Me, I have a certain level of expectations for my teams. I'm very data oriented. There are a certain amount of things that I expect them to do. And I'm very upfront on day one. I say, this is what I expect from you in 6 months, right? Because I know you don't do it today. So I'm going to train you, but that's what I expect, right? And you design your career ladder and you set up expectations and you tell to people, if you are not happy to do these kind of things, then maybe you change team, right? And I had cases like that where you reach a point with some people where you tell them, look, you are struggling in this role. You are not performing, right? We don't have the right setup to actually help you to grow because we actually are in a certain amount of pressure at the company level, right? We don't have enough resources to accompany you on that growth, right? I think the best way is for us to part ways and you go to another company. And for me, everybody that is leaving my team, whether it's they decide to leave or I decide for them to leave, I always spend time with them to understand what are their skills, what is good for them, where I think they should work because that's the right environment for them, right? And I do that because at that time at BCG, I actually got somebody that sat with me and did that exercise with me. So I'm actually doing a bit of career coaching on the side. And I actually wrote some articles about this because it's really hard to find as an individual, like where you can perform, what are your skills, the amount of pressure you can sustain or not, right? There are some people like their job is really, I want to get a salary, I want to work 9 to 5. And the rest is just like actually what I really want to enjoy, right? And there are some people like me where I grew up where my work was my passion, and that's something that I'm seeking, right? Try to find a work-life balance, of course. And you need to accompany your collaborators because in any case, if you have somebody in your team that you see is not performing because your expectation or the expectation of the company don't match with their natural skills and where they're going to be happy, you're going to destroy that person. And if you do it on purpose, then you're really a bad individual, right? You have to understand like how to push people where you see potential, then they can actually reach that level of expectation, and also understand when you need to part ways and accompany them. And it doesn't have to be bad to part ways. I changed companies many times. I also changed job many times. Myself, most of the time is on my condition, but actually I got fired twice as well. And I think you need to understand and tell people like this is just a long journey, your career, right? So if the job is not for you, the environment is not for you, it's not the end of the world. It's actually a learning experience to understand better where you can actually enjoy yourself, where you can contribute meaningfully and be more happy at work, and go try to find this condition and this company that can offer this condition for you. And sometimes it's within the company, sometimes it's in another company. But I think as manager, you should have very open discussions with your teammates about this, right? The worst that can happen is not saying anything. Somebody struggles for a month, and at the end of the day, you say, okay, you're on the plan of improvement. Really tough. And that's demoralizing, and that person will leave the company for sure. But on top of that, will be shattered, and then that person will need to reconstruct itself to being, again, a professional that enjoys working. That's really hard when you just got a very bad experience where you were struggling a lot, and actually you were let go because of a negative output.
Yeah. So there's a certain level of responsibility on the leaders to not shatter a person.
You need to care, right? And I think caring is sometimes having the tough discussion. I think Edmondson in our book say psychological safety is not about being like nice to everybody. It's actually like making sure that you set up the conditions, and if people don't meet the conditions, that you act on it. Caring about people is not just like hiding the fact that they're not performing or that the environment is not good for them. It's being upfront about the challenges that they face and try to work out a plan to resolve that issue if they can, and also acknowledging where it's not the case, so you don't continue beyond the reasonable point. And after that, we are all human beings. You just try to find the best for these people, right? I think as a manager, I really believe that your work doesn't stop with people like in your team or in your company, but actually it's making sure that the next step for them is the right one. And sometimes you can follow through even years after that. For sure, maybe not for everybody if you have a lot of people that are reporting into you, but I think for sure for that next step, you need to make sure that they have the right condition, because you never know who's going to come back to work with you. Everybody change company a lot. So one day you're going to find these people again in your team or in your company. And if you did everything you could for these people to grow, then you're going to benefit from it later on.
Yeah. What goes around comes around.
Comes around in that case, for sure. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, that's a great segue to the last topic I want to discuss, which is this aspect of being human as a leader. But just before we get that, this was a question from long ago, but I think it's a relevant one and maybe useful for people, especially working in bigger companies. Like for this explaining the thought process and the trade-offs and the decision-making process and so on, when it's a small team, it's relatively easy on these one-on-one conversations and going through the specific problems with the teams. But when you have a bigger organization, a bigger team, it may be difficult to go just with one-on-one conversations or even informal conversations, and you need a bit more of a structured way to do it, to document these things, the decision-making process. What are some ways that you've seen those working that you recommend people consider for, especially for bigger teams?
Yeah. So I think no matter the size of the team, there's always a management structure, right? So you always have a few direct reports, but a few direct reports, and you need to empower people to cascade this decision-making, cascading of frameworks and all of that, right? So that's the first thing that you need to empower. If a leader tries to jump like all the levels to talk to everybody, it doesn't work. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is having these very formal settings. So for example, at Typeform, what I did, for example, is when we launched like our roadmap, like the principle for the year, we had a very formal meeting with the entire tribe, meaning product, design, engineers, all in the same room. And we just presented, that's what we're going to do this year, and really represent the whole cascade of that's what the company needs to achieve. So like the strategic axis at the company level and the business goals, that's what it translates into for us in terms of long-term goal and objectives for the year. And then we go into each of the topics of what each team is going to do through the year, always making sure that there is the link to the higher level topics for sure. And on top of that, I like to design like some guiding, I have a paper, maybe I don't have it here, but like design like few like motto or principles to guide the team, right? So for example, at that time was like we experiment twice as fast as before, right? We had a value that was win together at Typeform, and I like hijacked it into learn together, right? So to really reinforce what are the key mindsets that we have. And at some point we also like work with an agency to help us on some topics of decision making, and they made us work on something called even over. For example, I will do this even over that, right? What do you put first when there is something that you like, when you have to make a decision, but you don't really have any objective qualitative data, you go back to these principles. What are your first principles of decision making? That's what I try to do, and that I've seen worked in bigger companies, to make sure that you have first clear documentation about what you want to do that people can refer to. Make sure that you take the time to present it to the team, have a session of discussions where people can ask questions, right? After that, have some follow-up with some key leaders in the organization to get the pulse. Did people understand, right? To really make sure that you follow up on this. Encourage questions. It's not always easy. People, most of the time, they just stay silent. So try to find ways to gauge if people understand what we presented. Usually you can see it in their daily work. Do you see they're going in the right direction? Are they using the keywords that you really insisted upon or not, right? And yeah, that's more or less it. Then you, again, big organization, you have to make sure that your leaders are empowered to empower their direct reports and etc. And this cascading is really the key, right? Because you can do the best presentation of the world. If you have 100 people below you, you cannot follow up with any other. It's like every 3 days you have to talk to somebody, and only once a year, right? So
of course,
it's not going to happen.
So it's about, first of all, being clear on what these trade-offs are, then having documentation and place where people can refer to, then leveraging other leaders and the different layers in the organization to cascade it to the teams, and also have these formal moments where you present and make sure that there's the space also for questions and clarifications to make sure that everyone is aligned.
Yeah. And maybe the last point, and we didn't talk about it, but we can, it's make sure that people understand what are the role and responsibilities of the other people in their group, right? The people that are going to work the closest with during the year, like what these people are going to do, how they contribute also to the roadmap, right? And that really makes sure that you also generate at, I would say, at a peer level, a level of accountability and positive reinforcements, where when someone is going to slip because they're going to go in the wrong direction or they start to operate outside of the boundaries that we all set, then you also have your peers that can bring you back into it. That's why, for example, when we look at a squad, I want the PM, the designer, the engineering manager to have up to an extent the same amount of knowledge about what's our roadmap, what's the key problem we want to solve, what do we want to learn next quarter, what are like 1, 2, 3 key metrics, and how do we do on these metrics, right? And for me, if you have that, you ensure that there's always somebody in the team that is going to make sure that the team goes in the right direction, but is always going to challenge openly if suddenly we go in the wrong direction, right? And you start to have more healthy discussions also about innovation because everybody understands where we go, what's our journey together. But even between product teams, right, you need to understand what happens. So then you avoid ping pong responsibilities and all this kind of stuff that really goes into the way of actually working efficiently. And you can see that is important because especially in a remote world, you don't have I'm sitting with that person, I can catch up, like chit-chatting around coffee. And I've seen in the company I was working in during COVID, a very strange thing happening where when we had to all go work from home, from the office, the product and engineering team, I think it's easier. You are used to work with like kind of a remote setup, even if you're in the office in some ways. So for us, it was like, okay, we work from home. Very good. The sales team for a good day and a half was completely lost. They didn't know what to do, right? Because they didn't add like the right like setup processes in place to understand what we were doing. Because every morning they had the stand up, like long conversations, a lot of live talk during the day in the office. And then they went into a remote setup where you could not have these discussions all together, right? It was one-on-one. It's really hard to have this on Slack. You had to otherwise to plan a lot of Zoom calls, right? And so they had to find their ways of understanding actually what's my role today, what do I do? And so they had to reset a lot of the frameworks of working to actually enable them to be, again, resilient and perform under adversity. So I think like this understanding of who is doing what, how do we all contribute and interact with each other can also facilitate the setup of performance in a team and encourage more psychological safety at scale.
Awesome. That's great. I think we could go on and on. Maybe we need to go for a round 2 sometime later.
Yeah.
But I wanted to tackle another topic I mentioned before, the being human as a leader, this aspect of human leadership. We already covered a bit caring for others and how important that is and how that affects people. But I also wanted to notice something, to point out something that stood out to me when we first talked, that you develop a very strong self-awareness of your limitations, triggers, ways of working, and so on. How did you develop that self-knowledge and self-understanding that helps you act better? How can a person listening to us develop that as well? And how can you foster that in your teams?
Yeah, it's a very good point. Well, I think there is a natural maybe trait of me that I have this imposter syndrome that is really, really strong throughout my career. And I think I always had a lot of doubt about what am I doing. And I think naturally I share about my way of thinking to just make sure that I'm going in the right direction on this. But I think what I realized when I started to manage people, that when you're a first manager, there's a lot of things that you don't know. And there's a lot of errors that you do, right? And I think naturally it came to me to just be very transparent about what I was thinking, because I had people in my team that I think knew more than me. And I just realized that being approachable to my team, like making sure that I was sharing to them what I was thinking, how did I feel? I just realized we had very positive interaction, very good mood in the team, very dynamic ways of working. And I was realizing that maybe other managers in some of the companies I work, maybe were not having this kind of, I would say, more healthy relationship with their direct reports, that maybe it was more very bossy, right? Because when you're a
Mhm.
manager sometimes, which is normal, like you want to be a bit more in control, especially if it's the first time, so you are very directive. And so I think naturally I just felt like, okay, if I share more to my team, it feels like they actually welcome it. And I get back a lot in return from them in terms of whether it is them sharing also their issues. I think I'm a very sensitive person as well by nature. And I think I can see very well when somebody is not feeling good at work, or I can see that they are stressed, right? And so I feel like it's quite easy for me to try to bring this topic on the table. Some people don't want to share. You need to be careful. But I think it was like I have a knack to really see when people like want to talk about something that is really bothering them. And I always make sure, because it's difficult conversation, right? Like even sometimes me, I was in situation where I had to fire people like at scale, right? I always try to give as much information as I can to the team within the respect of what I can do, but also not hesitate to sometimes, again, leadership told me I should not say that, but I will still say it to my team because they need to have this information for themselves. They are human beings. If you talk about having employees that have kids and think that there's going to be some layoff, you need to start to like hint that maybe some stuff are going to happen. So you give them the means to anticipate and just decide for themselves, do they want to see what's going to happen or do they want to anticipate and maybe leave the company? So I think it's about making sure that I want to do for them what I want my boss to do for me, which is giving me the means to make the right decision for me, being empathetic to understand that everybody has different situations at home that make them maybe not performing well, that have different backgrounds. So maybe they struggle more or they overperform as well. And you need to understand how to accompany them. So I think you need to be very, like, again, ears and eyes open to see. It's harder on Zoom and everything. I think when you are in the office, it's much easier to see when somebody is stressed or struggle, but you really need to make the time in your one-on-ones to the first part of the one-on-one, just have a chit chat about life, right? And see how people react. If they shut down immediately when actually they used to be very talkative, maybe something is happening, and try to understand and to encourage the openness of the conversation. I think there's no other way than just like showing that you are also willing to share some stuff, some of your personal struggles or personal struggles, right? I had some time when I was sharing with my team.
Modeling vulnerability.
I had sometimes I told my team, I said, look, guys, I just ended up a meeting with one of the leaders and I just got yelled at and it was really hard. And sometimes you see the teams, they are really kind and they say, oh, what can we do? It's our fault. You say, no, it's like we are all like struggling a bit now. I think we should stay the course and leave it to me. And you need to make sure that you share a bit of yourself to actually like people open, because I think one thing that I hate is people fear that an employee is underperforming because they are bad. And I think this is the 0.1% of the cases. When people are struggling at work, most of the time is there's something in their personal life that is happening and you need to acknowledge that. The second thing is you didn't give the means for them to actually perform well. So it's actually your fault. And most of the time, these are the two main reasons for why somebody doesn't perform. If you don't acknowledge that, if you don't look for the signs for that, you will always think that people underperform because they are bad. And that's when you just start to have the very toxic culture, right? So you need to be open, listen to the signs, have the discussions, and acknowledge sometimes that you did something wrong. I had cases where people told me the way you spoke to me, the way you handled this case made me feel bad, right? And you just have to acknowledge that you are not perfect. You have the discussion, and sometimes you say, I have no other choice than to do it this way, or it's a like deliberate choice for me to act this way, or sometimes it's, oh, I really didn't understand that it would affect you this way. And then we have conversations, right? I think as manager, you have a lot of topics that are hard about how you handle bad performance from other people, DEI topics, right? The cases, for example, that can be, especially in a startup, can be tough. Like there's a lot of like bad things happening, unfortunately. And having open discussions about this will make people feel comfortable to talk about other ideas that are more, I would say, like business and craft related, because they were able to talk about very deep topic with you, right? So give a bit of yourself for people to actually give a bit of themselves, and all together you create a cohesiveness that I think like really generate a bond that allows you to be more resilient in adversity. And by understanding each other better, you also understand how you will react to things. You can anticipate better how to create the right environment for people to thrive. If you, through a talk with somebody, you discover that somebody is, I don't know, loves to go into art and stuff like that, maybe you will leverage them to actually develop a very engaging presentation for, I don't know, a meeting with the leadership, right? So you find new ways to leverage the skills of your team and make them feel involved in actually like your entire way of running the team.
Yeah, awesome. Great. All right, I think we will wrap up. Thank you so much for sharing. I think we covered a lot of different things. This last part was very interesting on modeling vulnerability, being empathetic, understanding other people, and having these difficult conversations that allow people to reflect and to also understand more about what their strengths are and how they can better benefit the whole team. So thanks for sharing the very specific advice as well. And maybe just one last thing. Who is someone, a leader, maybe someone you worked with or someone you've read about that you look up to in this topic of leadership and psychological safety?
We'll take very concrete examples. So not somebody that you can look for a book or anything, but I think like I had 2 PhD advisors when I was doing research. And I think like both of them were really like making sure you were in the best condition to thrive. Like they were like very friendly, super funny, very open to discussing anything with me, making sure that I had everything I needed to perform, but at the same time making sure I was on track to deliver my PhD in time. You didn't have all the time in the world to just explore. And I always thought when I started to manage that I wanted to replicate who they were like a bit. And then I was like one of my manager at Typeform as well, Tobias, if you listen to this podcast, I think really for me showed me how to be even more empathetic, to really be very open, be very sharing, be very caring about his teams. And you need to be the link with the leadership. And you cannot shield your team from everything. I think you need to be transparent. And being transparent is also protecting them so that when something happens, they are not in the dark and suddenly something happens, right? So I think that's something that I really liked, and he really made sure also as well to give me all everything I need for me to thrive. So yeah, I think it's more like managers that I had more than like I would say one leader that are very, very well known. But I really
that's great.
But yeah, these are the examples.
That personal influence that on you.
I wish everybody has one manager in their lifetime where they can say that person was great and I want to emulate what I've seen, so that they can build on their end their own leadership and management style that again like trigger the same conditions that they had.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And thank you so much for the conversation. Anything people can look up to connect with you?
I have a LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is the best. LinkedIn is the best. I have a Medium, but it's been a very long time I didn't write. But if you want to look at their change, I have some nice articles there.
Okay.
And I'm writing a book actually on data. If you are on LinkedIn, you will see some news about that. But if you want to talk about this topic of psychological safety, I'm always happy to exchange with people on this. I've been doing mentoring for quite some time. Like I'm always happy to mentor people like within the limit of my available time. But I think it's especially for young managers, like never hesitate to relate or like try to find help with more experienced managers to try to understand how to tackle these kind of topics. Because of course you can try, but it's going to take time for you to find the right path. If you don't know what good looks like,
mistakes, it's a faster way.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was a great conversation.
Thanks, Joao.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Product Weekend podcast. I hope you found our conversation with Florian as insightful and inspiring as I did. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to follow us so you never miss an update. And if you found value in today's discussion, share it with a friend who might benefit too. Your support helps us continue bringing you more great content. Until next time, take care and keep building great products.